We got action.
So people are coming on. We're just gonna let a few more of our friends and family, community join us, and we'll be getting started shortly with our third gun reform town hall. Getting started shortly with our third gun reform town hall. Good evening. As we have people coming on and joining us, we hope that you will share this on your page, invite your friends, your Facebook friends to come on in and join us for this great discussion. We are getting ready to start part 3 of our virtual town hall meeting on gun reform. So for those that are on and those that are joining, I just want to say welcome on behalf of the Metropolitan Dallas Alumni Chapter. This is our third, as I just mentioned, virtual town hall meeting talking about a very important issue, gun reform. We all know that something needs to be done. We've looked at this from different perspectives. We started out last year talking to our state representatives and local officials and Dallas police officers and had a conversation about the problem of gun violence here in the Dallas area. And then we talked to some of our nonprofit organizations toward the end of last year, those that deal with domestic violence and victims of gun violence. And so now this time we're taking a different spin on it and we're looking at the faith-based perspective. So we have some individuals on that will share with us this evening. They bring a great deal of knowledge and experience in this area. From their own perspective. And so tune in and get ready. Remember, we're using our chat feature to discuss, so you can share your thoughts, you can respond to the comments that are being made, and just let's get informed and take action. So again, on behalf of I'm sorry, all these doctors got me want to say doctor, but Tanya Muruguri, who maybe I'm speaking something, but our chapter president, Tanya Muruguri, the Metropolitan Dallas Alumni Chapter Social Action Committee, as well as our partner, the Office of Police Oversight with the Dallas Police Department. We want to welcome you to this virtual town hall. And now my social action co-chair, Michelle Montgomery.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I am pleased to introduce our moderator for the third time in our 3-part series on gun reform. We have Jay Burrows. For those of you who don't know her, which would be very surprising since she's one of the hardest working ladies in our community, Lady Jade, affectionately known as Radio sweetheart, is a national syndicated radio co-host on DD and the morning show on K104 FM. She's also absolutely no stranger to our DFW community. She's a philanthropist in her own right, and she founded the nonprofit organization Project 16, which is also based right here in Dallas. Lady Jade is also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and we are honored that she is spending her evening with us. So Lady Jade, I will let you take it from here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Y'all, Michelle's been my friend for a long time. So I always appreciate you guys having me speaking on such an important topic that I would say, unfortunately, we have to continue the conversation on, right? Gun reform. So thank you all for your part in the community as well. We're going to jump right into it because this hour goes by really, really fast. I want to introduce our panel for the day. Look, I feel like we need to open up in prayer because we got some dignitaries on the line today, y'all, but they are definitely going to shed some light on this topic, gun reform, right? We live in the Bible Belt. So we have gotten a lot of different perspectives. So it's going to be definitely interesting to hear what our panel has to say. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Waters, founding pastor of Abundant Life AME Church. Thank you, Pastor Waters, for being here today. We appreciate it. You're looking sharp, might I add. Yes, you are. Also, Dr. Angela Johnson, managing director for Alliance for Greater Works. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for joining us. Also, we have Dr. Chalice Bradford, who is the pastor of Greater Garth Chapel AME Church. How you doing, Dr. Bradford? Welcome. And also Dr. Rochelle Carr, founder and CEO of Path Forward Empowerment. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to jump right into it. Matter of fact, if all panelists could kind of chime in on this question. As we all know, President Biden recently announced initial actions of the Biden-Harris administration to address the gun violence public health epidemic. Well, the fact sheet explicitly stated that cities across the country are amid a historic spike in homicides and violence that disproportionately impact Black and Brown communities and Americans. Considering separation of church and state, let me ask you all, what role should churches and faith-based organizations play in gun reform lawmaking? We can start with you, Dr. Johnson. I'm putting the pressure on you to go first. I know.
Thank you, Lady Jade, and thank you all for having me and for discussing this disturbing but important topic. Again, my name is Dr. Angela Johnson. I'm Managing Director of Alliance for Greater Works, which is a Christian intermediary nonprofit organization committed to transforming marginalized communities so that all people have opportunities to thrive. So gun violence prevention, it is a matter of faith because gun violence threatens life, and we are committed to choosing life in our organization by offering projects, initiatives, ideas, actions that all promote life and reduce trauma. And our federal gun laws in this country are significantly flawed. I think we all know that. We know that those gun laws have not kept pace with the modernization of the gun industry or the significant numbers of gun deaths that we continue to experience on a daily basis in this country. And the Biden-Harris administration's focus on gun legislation, gun reform legislation, gun safety legislation, it is hugely significant. Joe Biden's, I think, his empathy, his faith, his clear connection to many survivors of gun violence is important and meaningful, especially now that the NRA is this wounded organization. When you think about the rampant corruption, the financial position, the lawsuits, and the move to dissolve their nonprofit organization status. This is all really important when we're talking about the role of the church and faith-based organizations and how they can play in helping to prevent gun violence. And so these opportunities that the Biden-Harris administration will have to act using their executive authority to protect human life is hugely important. I don't think it's going to happen quickly, and our founding president and CEO, Sherry Willis, always reminds us that change takes a long time, but it will happen if we don't stop.
Sure, I appreciate that. What about you, Dr. Carr? What are your feelings on the topic of faith-based organizations and their role in gun reform and lawmaking?
All right. Thank you again. It's super excited to be here to Lady Jade and all the other panelists. I want to take a different perspective on answering that question. From a church perspective and a faith-based perspective, we live under what I call Caesar's law. And the church has, for me, a moral obligation. We are have dual citizenship. And so we live in the faith of God, but we render unto Caesar because that's the law we live under. And I think as the church, we have a moral obligation, faith-based organization, a moral obligation to our members and to the community on how we live in this Caesar world. And the church should be the loudest voice. And when I say church, I'm including the faith-based organization as well, should be the loudest voices in our communities for reform and injustices that are happening today. And I think so often churches and faith-based leaders are oftentimes more concerned about events of the past that they miss the moral degradation that are happening in the present. And just to shout out that scripture, it's Matthew 22:1. It says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God. And what we've done is we've literally just said, oh, it's separation of church and state, so I'm not going to get involved with the state. But we've missed the moral code of what God has called us to do as church and faith-based organization is to do what? Is to make sure that we are the light of the world. And in that light, making sure that we're reaching the community, reaching those young people that don't have a voice at home, don't have a voice in the school, and the church is silent. So if the church and the faith-based organization are silent, why do we exist? Why do they exist today? So I'll leave that question.
So bridging that gap, Dr. Bradford, I'll let you just go ahead and jump in because I see you're nodding over there. So.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the opportunity. It's great to be here. Of course, you've already stated that I am the servant leader pastor of Greater Garth Chapel in Dallas, Texas. And I want to go a little different here. I would argue that the church should be able to have a direct line to the state to place persons on a no-buy list who show signs of mental instabilities and lack of responsibility for owning a gun. However, our role as a faith-based community, it shouldn't be limited to the four walls of the church. We must remove the stigma of professional therapy in our Black and Brown communities. We must offer training and promote mental health like we promote other health challenges. We help our communities with high blood pressure, diabetes, weight issues, etc. So let's use that same energy when it comes to mental health.
That's good. That's good. You touched on something, and I'm going to come back to it in a second, but I definitely want to let Pastor Waters chime in on this question. And then I do want to touch on something you just said, Dr. Bradford.
Yeah.
Dr. Waters?
Sure. Well, first, again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you all tonight. Let's dive right in. You know, the notion of separation of church and state has been misunderstood, misinterpreted through time. Really, that notion was that the United States of America could not have a state-sanctioned religion. For instance, what was in England, the Church of England. So there could not be one church that was authorized to operate within the nation. Right. So I think that's an important point. We are called, I believe, by God to engage power structures towards the liberation of our people. And our model is Jesus himself, who challenged structures, who challenged empire towards the liberation of his people. And so when we challenge power, when we argue for things that are life-giving for our people, we are in fact following after the Christ. Now, I really want to lean into the issue of how this pandemic of gun violence impacts Black and Brown communities and why. Because quite often assigned to our communities is some sense of pathology, which is an error. There's nothing inherently challenged concerning our communities. So then someone will ask, well, why are we visited upon with such violence more than other communities? Well, that gets to the heart of white supremacy, which we hardly connect the dots with as it relates to gun violence, right? When you live in an impoverished community, you are not more likely to be violent. You're more likely to be victimized by violence. Let's look at the city of Dallas, which has more concentrated communities of poverty, racialized, than any other city in America, that have more than doubled over the last 30 years. And we look in the areas where we see gun violence particularly take root. We also see a number of other factors: lack of access to food because of food apartheid, challenges within our schools, poor infrastructure in terms of houses, poor social services to those communities, right? So I actually have an article coming out in the Dallas Morning News, should be out on this Sunday, that talks about how we should re-envision our connections to public safety, okay? And in reality, if we address the issues of poverty that have been racialized and put forth because of the legacy of white supremacy, we will then likewise address the issues of violence that we see in our community. And I think the church, more than anyone else, should be speaking out against this violence and for this revolution. Because when you think about it, there are probably 3 institutions that are integrally involved when gun violence breaks forth. You have the ER doctors who are attempting to save lives. You have, unfortunately, the mortuaries that have the responsibility of caring for the dead. But oftentimes, where do they go between the time that the assault has happened and the time that it is time to commit their bodies to the ground? Is to us. We are the ones, as pastors, as faith leaders, who get the call at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning that someone has been shot. Most unfortunately, this past weekend, not too far from our church, there was another drive-by shooting. I did say another one. I remember the last time we had the drive-by shooting, I was at home, got a call, put on a collar, ran down to Baylor Hospital to see a ER room full of weeping friends and family members for a young lady who had been shot in the neck. Here we have another situation, same area, same space, a young boy shot in the head who is now deceased. A nephew of one of my members who was shot through the shoulder and it exited out of his neck. There's so many others who are impacted by this on a daily basis, but we don't solve the issue through crime and order measures that only help perpetuate systems of white supremacy. We solve the issue by speaking to the racialized poverty that creates an atmosphere for these things to fester.
That's an excellent point that you're making. There was a statement that you made earlier. You said those that live in impoverished communities are more likely to be victimized by violence. Let me ask you this. What is your thought on those that might say, well, if you're victimized by violence, that may in fact make you more violent?
Yes, it's a totally different thing. So the reality is that when you look at, we're just the statistics driven. When you look at impoverished communities, white people who live in poverty actually have a higher rate of violent victimization than Black people. We don't talk about that. But why is it more perpetuated in our communities than others? Well, then you have to look at the issue of redlining and of concentrated poverty, poverty surrounded by poverty. So we are more impacted by the realities than others. I think that's an important distinction, and maybe we can mine that out tonight.
Y'all, I don't know if we're gonna have enough time for all this tonight, because listen, there are so many important issues that have already been spoken on that, look, we could be on here till about midnight, but we're gonna keep it moving. But these are some really good points you all have made already so far. Dr. Johnson, I want to ask you this. We know that for over 20 years, Alliance for Greater Works has empowered cross-sector leaders to address the root causes of inequities, as Dr. Waters was just speaking on. One of these complex problems is mental health, as look, Dr. Bradford also touched on earlier, also gun violence. What has your organization done in conjunction with faith-based organizations to increase awareness and perceptions of mental health and wellness in African-American communities?
So our work with youth and mental health began after the horrific shootings in the summer of 2019 at the Roseland Community Center, which is off of 75 in Lemon, when Brandon Nia Bennett, the 9-year-old girl, and 2 17-year-olds, Gregory Horton and Zacchaeus Banks, were all killed by gun violence within weeks of each other. I believe there was 2 other teens that were taken to the hospital but survived. And it was that level of gun violence that one of our faith partners, Behind Every Door, they provide after-school programming and summer youth development programming at the Roseland Community Center. They just hadn't experienced that level of gun violence before, and the entire community was just reliving these devastating losses. And so Alliance's core expertise is about bringing wisdom, but also the commitment together to solve these complex problems. So we brought in this world-renowned pastor / professor / psychologist to kind of help that community heal. And that is how our mental health and wellness programs for those working with youth specifically progressed in what they are today. And so I know we've got a Healing Youth Alliance training that's coming up that's free to the public. It's open to anybody who's working with youth. And I believe it's coming up April 28th, 29th, but you can find more on our website, alliancetx.org, or on our social media pages if anybody is interested in participating in that training. But prior to our Healing Youth Alliance training, we partnered with the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health to create this movement of churches, and it was called the African American Faith-Based Mental Health Education Initiative. They worked throughout the state of Texas, and their goal was to kind of increase this awareness and perception of mental health recovery and wellness in African American communities and reduce the stigma. So Dr. Bradford, as well as Dr. Waters and Dr. Carr, have all talked about the stigma associated with mental illness, especially in African American communities. So the faith community, you know, that's kind of like been this anchor institution in African American communities, continues to play this crucial role. We have unique strengths as the church and as faith-based organizations, and we have the ability to not only identify and connect people with local behavioral health resources, but we also have the ability to support faith leaders in their own mental health and wellness, and making sure that they address their own mental health and wellness. So that's how our mental health and emotional well-being programs were born.
No, I appreciate you addressing that, man. Reading the statistics, I have a nonprofit and we work with teenagers, and just learning the numbers from 2020, right? That African American teens and children between the age of 10 and 19, those suicide numbers have doubled.
Yes,
That's astronomical. That's insane, right? And so I appreciate your organization and everybody on this call that, you know, we do obviously address spiritually, we dress ourselves spiritually because it is a spirit, right? But focusing on that mental health perspective. So definitely appreciate what you all are doing in the community. That's amazing. Like, look, we'll talk later because I definitely want to learn more about the organization. Dr. Carr, I know that with your organization, the mission is to deliver a passport to self-leadership for your clients through positive thinking, spirituality, and shaking off unproductive habits that can get in the way of achieving goals. So let me ask you a question. What would you tell your clients about getting a license to carry a gun versus not having the license to carry? Because as we all know, earlier this month, this new bill, right? What is it? The House Bill 1927, which if they pass it, it's going to allow people to carry a gun without having a license. So do you feel that people should be licensed to carry, or do you feel that it's not necessary?
Well, let's be real. People are walking around now without license and they have guns. And and there are young people in our communities of, as Dr. Waters says, impoverished neighborhoods that are walking around with guns.
Mm-hmm.
Where do they come from? And I think that oftentimes when we talk about white supremacy, white supremacy has always been here. When do we take ownership and responsibility on the Black and Black killing that is happening in our communities from gun violence?
Mm-hmm.
So whether you have laws of people having guns, having licenses, that's fine. That's not our community. Most of them. It's not, but how do we deal with the guns that are getting into those communities? That again, you don't have to have a gun. I mean, you don't have to have a license. You don't even have to walk in a store. You just, go down the street and, Ray can give you a gun,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't question those things. And I think, again, we have to begin to go back to policing our own community, calling in accountability. And I think that begins with the church. I go back to that. Where is the church in giving accountability? It's not about, the big marches. It's about intermingling with our own community. And so do I think people should have a license to carry a gun? Yeah, I think there should be a major process, because there are people, as we go back to talking about mental illness, that are walking in and getting guns, and next day they're shooting up schools. And whether it's concerning, it is very, very concerning. But when we start in our own community, you know, and every day somebody's getting shot, we don't see that on the news, but, you know, it's teenagers are being shot every day by each other. What are we saying about that? What are we doing about that? So, yeah, I think everyone should have a license that wants to carry a gun, but we don't have to necessarily have a license to go to get a gun in our neighborhood to kill each other.
Right. So there's other issues that need to be addressed with that.
Yes.
So I would love to hear from one of the pastors. Dr. Carr, you mentioned something when you said, basically, where's the village, right? You feel like the church should be the village, but as a pastor, do you all feel oftentimes you're trying to be that village, but maybe there's a bit of rejection with, especially right now, I don't know what it is, but it seems to be, a separation right now, you know, like as African Americans, we pride ourselves that, you know, at our relationship with the Lord, right? But now it seems to be like a fad where it's okay to be separated from Christ, right? And to be that individual. Do you all experience that, especially with our younger generation, is what I've been noticing. And I guess COVID didn't help, because we weren't able to go to church every Sunday and, you know, be involved and submerged in our relationship, you know, within, you know, being poured into, I would say, unless we did it intentionally, logging onto the television and so on and so forth. Would any other pastors like to address that?
Sure. Here's the unfortunate truth. The church, the Black church in America, has failed multiple generations of Black Americans, including the impoverished. You know, Tupac Amaru Shakur said about 2 decades ago, more than that now, that many of our Black churches were ghetto mansions in the community, but not necessarily serving the community. But we can go even further than that. Dr. King in 1963, letter from Birmingham jail, he talked about the outright disgust happening amongst young generation, which would have been baby boomers at the time, for churches that were disengaged from their daily activities and daily experiences. Dr. Carrie Day, wonderful woman, a scholar, says that 10% of Black churches were actually involved in the Poor People's Campaign, only 10%. So we have a certain nostalgia concerning the Black church that is more mythology than truth. Most of our churches have been about self-preservation as opposed to liberation. And so we got to make that distinction. We live in a time now where there are fewer religious participants in America. That's across faith traditions, churches, mosques, synagogues, than any other time in American history. Less than 50% of Americans are connected to some house of worship. And that's been trending for some time.
Sure.
It's also manifest with Black millennials. I sat on a panel with the National Smithsonian Museum, African American History and Culture last year, where we were talking about the disconnect between younger generations, emerging generations of adult generations of Black Americans and the church. I think a great part of that separation is that they do not see the daily impact and role of the church in their lives, really working to rectify and address the matters that they are experiencing. And so I'm always cautious to speak of our current condition in the church and, if you will, place the blame or place the responsibility at the feet of children who have largely been rejected and cast asunder by the church. You know, why would I come to church when the church's never been there for me? You know, before he lost his mind, and I do mean that. I do really pray for the brother. I think he has some significant challenges after the loss of his mother. But Kanye West made a very powerful statement concerning his grandmother about all the work she did for the church. And then when she was needing some assistance, the church wasn't there for her. And I think we have to hear that. We have to receive that critique. It can't always be the church passing the blame on other folk and say simply because, you know, even before COVID, our doors are open. Why aren't you coming out to us? If you look at, and I'll say this very quickly, if you look at Jesus as a model of ministry, which I think we all should aspire to, Jesus was always outside of the church. He was always in Galilee working amongst blue collar, impoverished folk. When he was in church, he was usually there critiquing folk, talking about their failures to uplift the kingdom of God on earth. But if you wanted to find where Jesus was, he was with the outcasts and the quote unquote, as one Bible says, the notorious sinners. And so I just sometimes have a vivid imagination of where I think Jesus might be today versus where we think Jesus would be today. And very rarely do I think we would find Jesus if Jesus walking on the earth today. I don't think we would find him hanging out within our sanctuaries. I think we'd find him hanging out in the streets. And if that's where Jesus is, then maybe we ought to join him.
He'd be in the deep, Dr. Waters.
Come on.
Come on, stop. Don't look. Okay, we got to stay focused today, Dr. Waters. You about to take it somewhere else. We're about to look past the plate up in here today. Okay,
Listen.
that's a good point. That was a very good point. I appreciate that, Dr. Bradford. I do want to ask you. I do want to address something. Oh, go ahead. You want to?
I wanted to piggyback on that though. What happened to the church when the community knew the pastor? What happened? What happened to the community and the people? Or we're in these silos, and we have separated ourselves from each other. The churches, we have a church on every corner, but we are not impactful. We have a church on every corner, but we don't talk to each other. We have a church on every corner, but are we feeding the homeless? Are we feeding our communities? What's really going on with the churches? Yes, all of us are doing something to help our communities. Yes, the community, they know us, but that doesn't speak to every church in the community. At some point, we as pastors, faith leaders have to say, I'm here. What do you need? I'm here for.
Oh, it muted, Dr. Bradford. You muted, Dr. Bradford. Yep, I don't know what happened.
Don't know what happened.
There you go. There you go.
We have to stop saying, I'm going to stay in my church. You come to us. I'm going to stay behind my pulpit and you listen to me. But at what point are we going to take off the collar, put on some regular clothes, and talk to the community where they are?
Whew. Lord, that is good. That is so good. That is absolutely, that's so good. When we talk about gun reform, we get to the point where every day now, it seems like since the world is open back up, we're hearing neighborhood shootings, mall shootings. You can't go to the movies anymore. There's nowhere that you can go. We have had mass shootings in churches. So let's talk about the security in the churches. I know the churches are getting ready to open back up as well, right? I'd love to hear from anybody on the panel that definitely wants to discuss the security in the church. But Dr. Carr, I do want to ask you, I know your organization helps faith-based organizations with resources. So let's just say, what if church finances can't support hiring security guards, right? And people to make the congregation feel secure? What are some measures that, a church can take to help protect their members? I mean, should they have members that are carrying guns? Should we have, metal detectors when you're coming through the church? Like, what do you recommend?
Two things. First of all, there's always a friend cop to the church, police officer, depends on where you're from, I'll be nice, police officers to the church. So you can ask officers, hey, can you volunteer some time? Just come, we meet for 1 hour, keep it 1 hour, because that's free. And can you come by and just, sit in your car? So there are things out there that you can do. Do I recommend that everybody become gun-toting members of the church? If you've been in a Black church, you don't want folk having guns in the church, especially business meet. I'm just gonna put that out there like that. No, but seriously, there's a way to protect yourself. And like I said, there are officers that would come and volunteer to give time, security guards that are, registered to carry guns and things like that to come and volunteer. And so you just have to seek out those individuals. And I know that in mostly all churches, there are security guards. If you don't have one, reach out to me. I can help you find one. So yeah, I think you can get somebody to volunteer if you can't afford it.
Dr. Bradford and Dr. Waters, you all, within the four walls, we'll discuss within the four walls of the church. How do you make your congregation feel safe? Again, we are seeing on the news where there have been church mass shootings. So that can be one of those things where people are fearful just to be in any large crowd, right? So how do you make your congregation feel safe?
Well, it depends on the crowd, right?
True.
Okay. Let's see. Majority Whip James Clyburn, of course, he's a close friend of Biden. He announced on a couple of weeks ago that he was reintroducing legislation that would close what has become known as the Charleston Loophole. Mm-hmm. The loophole allowed Dylan Roof, the white supremacist who killed 9 people in 2015 at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, of course, to buy a gun, even though he should not have purchased a gun. He should have been barred from purchasing a gun. Why is it that we in the church are not able to protect ourselves? This white man walked in the church, sat right by the pastor without anyone discerning, without anyone paying attention. Yes, there should be someone at the door looking at others. Okay, well, this person looks suspicious, but that person has to be vetted and licensed and be mentally stable to view and to understand what's going on in the church, because you do realize people are coming to church with guns. We just don't know it.
It's true.
So yes, I do agree with it. We just have to make sure that we are careful, period.
Pastor Waters, you plan on putting up some metal detectors at the front door when we walk in?
No, I ain't doing that though.
This is a very impactful conversation for us all, but I'm particularly referencing Dr. Bradford and myself as AME ministers. This hits close to home, as this was one of our congregations. It hits even deeper for me as one of my dear friends, Reverend Sharon Risher, lost her mother, Ethel Lance, in that massacre.
My God.
A 71-year-old trustee of the church who was shot 8 times at point blank range. Sharon Risher wrote a book entitled For Such a Time as This, Hope and Forgiveness After the Charleston Massacre. I want to commend it to you, and not just because I did have the honor of writing the foreword, but it's really the truest manifesto on working towards healing, hope, and forgiveness that I've ever read. And I had the privilege of being with her in Manhattan when her book was on the Today Show and MSNBC Live. I've personally gone to Charleston to Mother Emanuel. I went there about a month after the massacre, and with my own eyes, bore witness to the bullet holes in the ceiling and in the walls and in the floor. And a gentleman by the name of Brother Nathaniel, another trustee, pointed over to a group of ordinary white tables to say that's where most of the killing happened. As pastors, we're called to shepherd and to watch over and protect, but there are limitations, particularly in a nation where there are 3 times as many guns as there are people, particularly in a nation when a person can possess a firearm that can release dozens of bullets in a matter of seconds. And so there are things that we do as congregations. We have security, we have security cameras. There's some pastors and congregations who are able to hire additional security and even have bodyguards, but that doesn't mean you're safe. And I think that's the point that I want to address. In America, until we have national gun reform, for the very reasons you've already expressed, there's no place that you are truly safe. Not at a restaurant, not in a movie theater, not in the park. And the reality is, having a gun at your home makes you more likely to die of gun violence than not. So even when you bring a gun into your home, you've actually increased the possibilities of dying related to gun violence. Now, the interesting thing is there are people all across the world. You know, American exceptionalism causes us just to be so inward looking and to see ourselves. But there are people all around the world who look at us and they wonder what in the world is going on with you all. Why can't you simply resolve what is relatively a very simple issue, which is to place some limitations on the possession and usage of guns? As we now have the Texas House, as you just mentioned, wanting to make it legal in our state to own a firearm without training and without a license. And here's the last thing I'll say on this, and there's a lot that we could say, but this is the last thing I'll say on this. Don't you for a moment think that that law is for us. I dare you be a Black man or Black woman without a license, walking around with a gun and think you're going to be okay, particularly if you encounter police officers. Ask Philando Castile. He had a license for his weapon and his life was still taken. So I don't necessarily think that this law will be applied equally across the board. Here's the deal. We won't be safe until we truly address this issue. That doesn't mean that we live in fear. I don't believe that that is our responsibility, but I believe that we have to be active in our engagement to bring about reform.
That's good. Dr. Bradford, earlier you mentioned that you feel like the church should be linked directly with the state to be able to address individuals that they should put on a do not buy list, which to me means that relationship that you have with certain individuals within the church, right? That you know there may be a mental illness, right? So I want you to touch on that in just a moment, but I do want to talk to Dr. Johnson about mental illness. I know your organization addresses the increasing awareness of mental health and especially in African-American communities. For those that are watching today, can we address some of those signs? I know that our pastors work very closely and through discernment and just probably just knowing they understand what some of those signs that they're looking for. But what are some of those mental illness signs and how trauma of gun violence can affect our long-term health? Think about it. There is trauma that happens to us as children that later on turns into a mental illness if left unaddressed. So let's talk about some of those signs that people at home could be looking for, whether it's in their teenagers or within themselves, honestly.
Well, that's a great question. And let me just start by saying I am not a behavioral health professional, but I will try to answer your question as best I can. And we all know that mental illness is frequently stigmatized and misunderstood, particularly in African-American communities. And although mental illness is, it's not like African-American communities experience it at a greater rate than other communities. But what we do know is that a lot of it is cultural. And so we need culturally competent and trained behavioral health providers. Like for me, for instance, if there's something going on in my life, I might go to the doctor and say, my stomach is my headache. I've got these pains in my arms and my legs. And it's really about the stress that I might be seeing in my community. But the doctor is so focused on finding out the physical cause that he's not picking up on the stress that I might be expressing. And so that's why it is so important that we train doctors as well as mental health professionals to understand culturally what it means to serve in the African-American community. And a piece of that is cultural, but you know, in Southern culture, especially in the church, when people had anxiety or people were distressed, a woman was distressed, she would just fall out, right? I know my grandmother would just fall out. Or we say these things like the person is touched or they just have bad nerves. But if we bring that back to gun violence, what we see, like what we hear, the images that we see, we may be reliving those and it may be causing this chain event of re-experiencing, like I'm here again. So this can be a very symptomatic way to look at it. And there's no doubt, like the stuff that we see on the news today can start to activate anybody's symptoms, even if they've been healed of a clinical condition, especially something like surviving gun violence. So in the clinical world, we would say that that person has been triggered, they've been re-traumatized. But I think part of our work, especially as faith-based, as the church and faith-based organizations, and what we do at Alliance is about bringing people and partnerships together to say that, you know what, gun violence is not about constitutional rights. You know, if somebody's had 5, 10, 15 drinks, we don't think twice about saying, give me your keys. And it doesn't take away their constitutional right to drive. We just say right now, you know what, you shouldn't be driving. Give me your keys. I think we have to do the same thing when it comes to gun violence. That if we know that there's somebody that's in distress, that's been triggered, that they're really upset, they're in despair, they're hopelessness, well, it's not the time for you to have access to a weapon and ammunition. So we need to be able to have these hard conversations with people to say, you know what, let me hold your peace and your ammunition until you get some help. And that extends, you know, to our families, our cousins, our brothers, our neighbors, and anybody else that we're experiencing, that we see that is experiencing a crisis. There's warning signs. We're living with these people. We go to church, we go to the store with these people. We see the warning signs. In Walmart, you can see the warning signs, and I don't want to point Walmart out. But I think part of what Alliance does is give people the tools to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma, and when people are having a mental health crisis, and give them those tools that they can protect themselves, but also that person can get some help.
Great point. Is that pretty much what you were addressing also earlier in conjunction, Dr. Bradford? Those relationships, you see those signs as a pastor, a leader of a church. You have those intimate conversations. You are engaging with certain people in your congregation, and you're seeing this. I do exactly see why you say I should be able to pick up the state and say, I need you to write a name down. This person should not be able to legally own a firearm. Is that what you were addressing earlier, Dr. Bradford?
Absolutely. Not only that, because we are the first line of defense, as Dr. Waters stated earlier, they come to the pastor first. But the pastor has to be able to recognize or understand its capacity. I'm not a full or licensed professional. I have to be able to say, you need some help. Let me get you some help and refer them to the appropriate help. Mm-hmm. Yes, our first line of defense, our first line into the state to say, okay, this person, there are warning signs here. We should not issue a gun to this particular person unless they have a background check, they go through particular counseling and et cetera. It's time out for us to stop being in a place where we are saying, no, you don't need help. You'll be okay. Just pray about it. We've got to stop saying, yes, prayer is the key to everything, but you also need some help. Mm-hmm. And if it's some medicine that you need, get you some medicine. Yeah, I know a lot of times we say, no, we don't need the medicine, but if you had diabetes and you wanted to live, what would you do? Mm-hmm. If you had high blood pressure and you wanted to live, what would you do? So it's the same thing with mental health. I need some help, so I am going to a professional to get the help that I need. You can see a scratch. Mm-hmm. You can see if someone broke an ankle, has a broken ankle, but you can't always see internal hurt. The Bible says, of course, putting those things that are behind us that we may press toward the mark for the higher calling, which is in Christ Jesus. But if I can't see your past, I can't fully diagnose what's going on with you.
Mm. That was deep. I definitely agree with you. We have to start normalizing that conversation. We have to take away the negative stigma within our community as well. A lot of people are afraid to speak up and say that, you know, I don't feel right. Maybe I'm not acting a certain type of way. We don't even want to address family members sometimes, that was mentioned earlier, because we don't want our family members to be labeled, right? So it's almost like I heard a saying before, it says, you don't wait for all 4 tires to go flat before you take your car in, right? But we don't want to address ourselves before things get out of control for fear of what other people may think.
You know, do you remember, I think it was Soul Food, where they had, remember that? The uncle
Oh
was
yeah, yeah, the
in a
movie.
back
Yes.
room,
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
and they just left him there without getting him the help.
Yep.
And a lot of us have had some family member that we know of that has had mental instabilities, if you will. But at what point are we going to rise up and say, my sister, my brother really needs help. I want to get you the help that you need. But that person also has to be willing to receive the help.
That's true.
Because as you know, we cannot force the help on someone. They have to be willing to go.
Absolutely.
If
Earlier, oh, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Just very quickly, this is also a policy issue. Part of the issue in Texas is that we do not invest in mental health. As a matter of fact, our county jail is the biggest mental health provider that there is. And so if we had more compassionate legislatures and a constituency that held them accountable, we can get those dollars that are necessary to help more people. I think that's an important point. At the same time, while mental health is a challenge across all communities, not all the violence that we see as it relates to gun violence is because of mental health issues.
True.
I think that's an important point. Quite often, the cause of the violence is the accessibility of the weapon, the fact that it's there. So last year or 2 years ago, when we were in the midst of this major homicidal violence in the city of Dallas, and everybody was wondering what we need to do, the police were very clear to say that the majority of that homicides that they were responding to were of persons in intimate relationship with each other, persons under the same household, whether they be friends or family members. It wasn't someone out on the street, wasn't some drive-by. It was someone in close proximity with each other, may have gotten in a heated argument, a lot of tension, a lot of stress. And guess what? There's a gun here. I have access to it.
Mm-hmm.
I use it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I always want to be clear, because sometimes, we can begin to, as we talk about mental health, we can begin to stigmatize persons who have challenges as though they're more prone to violence. That's not as great of the challenge as it is the accessibility to the firearm. If it's there, and if cooler heads don't prevail, sometimes it's used.
Very good point. And I'm glad you cleared that up, Dr. Waters. Definitely appreciate that. And I want to talk about your book. As a matter of fact, I know we're running out of time. There's so much. Dr. Carr was mentioning earlier, we're talking about gun laws, we're talking about gun reform, but so many people so many of our within our community, they don't have, they don't worry about getting licensed. They can go down the street and get it. So I guess it was last year you wrote a book for beautiful Black boys who believe in a better world, right, Dr. Waters?
That's correct.
Tell us just briefly about that book and what is the discussion? Y'all, I get so upset that the discussion has to be had, right? I hate to say it, but there's so many discussions that have to happen in a Black household that don't happen in other households, which is a whole nother issue. But what does that discussion look like with our Black boys as it relates to racism, gun violence, even like you said, it could be violence, Black on Black violence that Dr. Carr was addressing earlier. What should that conversation look like?
Well, for beautiful Black boys who believe in a better world was a book that I wrote based on our life, our real lived experiences as a family. My beautiful wife and I have 4 children, the youngest of which is only about 4 months old. His name is Justice, just got here. Our eldest is named Jeremiah. Mm-hmm. And over his life thus far, he'll be 15 in September, he has been impacted by so many acts of violence in concentric circles, violence within our city, violence within our nation, violence in a larger context of white supremacy. And so it's really a book that was sparked by the murder of Jordan Edwards in Bald Springs. Our church hosted the very first direct action vigil and direct action response following his death. I was connected with the Edwards family. We were marching, but as we were speaking at the vigil in Mesquite, actually it was Bald Springs, where his friends and peers from Mesquite High School were there. I was one of the persons who spoke that night. And on that occasion, Jeremiah drew very close to me. Now, he'd been with me to other vigils, unfortunately, been present there, but I think he was in such close age proximity to Jordan Edwards that it impacted him very deeply. And before we retired that night, he came to the threshold of my wife in our room and said, "Dad, I'm tired of folk killing each other. I'm tired of people hurting each other. What can we do to make things better?" So about 2 weeks later, we were on a flight headed to Los Angeles for a speaking engagement, and that conversation began to play back in my mind. Put pen to paper, began writing. When we landed, I shared it with my wife and felt it was a book. I've been grateful for the reception it's gotten thus far. Essence Magazine named it one of the top 6 books on race for young people. It's received thus far, thank God, it's received 4 national awards. We have a partner with the Muhammad Ali Center. Lonnie Ali, Muhammad Ali's widow, read an early copy, said we want to support this, we want to get behind it. And so the Education Center at the Muhammad Ali Center created an activity and companion guide to go with the book so that you can read it and engage young people about matters of police brutality, racial violence, and gun violence in our society. So it's through the eyes of my son, his experience, his observations of the world, and ultimately arrives at what we must do to raise up children as anti-racist to change these realities. Available everywhere books are sold.
I couldn't have sold it any better. Look, I think we're all gonna go out and buy a copy. Yeah, we are literally, I told you guys this was gonna go by fast. And these are conversations that need to continue. I don't want it to stop here. I do want to thank I do want to thank everybody that tuned in today. I want to allow everybody to give closing remarks if you don't mind. And Dr. Carr, I will start with you. If you could sum it up, right? I guess it's just such a difficult way to put it. What is one nugget that you'd like to leave with all of our viewers today? And also, who can benefit from Path Forward Empowerment, and how do they get in contact with you?
Again, thank you so much, Lady Jade, and to all of Delta Sigma Theta. I'll give a shout out on behalf of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
All right.
Again, I am a CEO of Path Forward Empowerment. You can email me. I help people just find their purpose, how to navigate in life and in this world that we're in. You can email me at info at pfempowerment.com. Again, info at pfempowerment.com. If I could sum this up, I think that was the other question. Churches, get involved. You are not an island. That's not what, and I'm a part of the church. I'm so I'm talking to myself. Sure. The 4 walls were not made. It's not a country club. So the community needs us. And if we are not going to be a part of the community we are called to serve, why are you there? And I think you have to ask yourself the hard question. It's okay to, sit on a throne, fly around the world and have those opportunities to speak everywhere else, but your community needs you. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in the hospital, you came to see about me. And it shouldn't just be the pastor doing it. It should be everyone in your church should be empowered to serve the community that you're in. So if you're not going to do it, why are you there? Leave it there.
Amen. All right. Thank you, Dr. Carr, so much for taking your time to be here with us today and for your insight on so many different issues that we addressed today. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. If you could leave us with one closing remark, as well as give us the information for Alliance for Greater Works, and just in case someone missed it, who can benefit from your services?
So thank you again for having me, and I just commend you all for having this brave but necessary conversation. And thank you for my esteemed panelists that I'm sitting on this panel with. I want to thank you too. If I had to leave with one nugget of wisdom, it would be, I think it's important to understand the ways we equip the church to equip adults and children with resiliency building tools to guard against traumatic experiences before they happen, that lead to these mental breakdowns and depression and addiction and homicide and gun violence and on and on and on. there are prevention approaches, and we must begin to use them. If you'd like to learn more about Alliance and the work that we do, if you want to learn how we develop leaders to create more equitable communities, our website is alliancetx.org. And I would be remiss if I did not invite you all to our prayer, our powerful hour of prayer that we are having on May 13th. Feel free to come, invite a friend. It's virtual, and you can also find that information on our website, alliancetx.org, or any of our social media sites with the hashtag Alliance for Greater Works.
Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for your time today and all your insight as well. Greatly appreciate you taking your time. Dr. Waters, closing remarks, and if anybody would, like to come out and check out Abundant Life AME Church, how give us the address. Y'all have an Instagram, all that good stuff.
Well, I appreciate it again. Thank you, Lady J, for moderating this conversation. And I am really delighted to have the privilege of being in presence of these dynamic women. Black women have been the forefront of movement and have advanced us forward. And so a tip of the hat to you, and thank you for leading the way. I'm just honored to be in your presence today. Allow me to give a shout out also to one of my members at the church, Ron High School, Harlem Murray, who's also there with you at K104. Very grateful for all that he does in the community as well. You can find us online, because of COVID and because COVID is real. We are in the virtual space. And so we worship virtually at 10 a.m. You can go to Abundant Life AME, again, Abundant Life AME on Facebook for our Facebook live stream. Hit us up. We'd love to be a part of you in terms of kingdom building, in terms of reaching out and making our community all that God intends it to be. I think it's appropriate to close with one of the great wisdom statements from a dynamic sister who said once, "How are you going to win if you ain't right within?" I think this is the invitation for us to get right within so that we can help without. Until we fix our stuff as a church, we won't be able to be effective in providing the support that is necessary to bring about liberation and freedom to our people. Again, it's been my honor to be with you tonight. Thank you.
And just in case they didn't know, that was Dr. Lauren Hill. Okay.
Dr. Lauren Hill. Doctor.
I love it. Thank you so much. All right, Dr. Bradford, closing remarks. And if anybody would love to come to Greater Garth Chapel AME Church, how do they get in touch with you? Uh-oh, you're muted. You're muted, Dr. Bradford. You know what?
Am I going to really just, that's all right. That's all right.
No,
This has been such a pleasure, such an exciting opportunity to share with my colleagues, and you have been such a gracious host, Sora Jade.
Oh, thank you, Sora. Oh, hey, Sora. Hey.
So thank you again for the invitation, MDA DST. You can hit us up on our website or Facebook page, GGC AME. I tell you, this has been an absolutely wonderful time. My grandfather used to say, "What you gonna do when they come for you?" My grandfather used to say this. My grandfather's old, right? And come on now, I know this, but anyway. And he would always say, if you're going to really impact the community, you have to be in the community. So the church, Greater Garth, is absolutely in the community, serving every Friday from 4 until the food is gone. The address is 2828 Carpenter Avenue in sunny South Dallas. Yes, you can come get a hot meal, clothes, food, anything that you need, PPE. We're right there on the corner of Malcolm X and Carpenter. Come on by. But we'd love to see you at noon on Sundays. Facebook, Greater Garth Chapel. Thank you again.
I love that. Y'all have been the best panel. I have learned so much today. I feel I've gained so much insight, and I appreciate more than anything your transparency and your realness, because a lot of times we can get on these panels and we can make it sound good, but I appreciate you all just really just being super transparent and sharing with our audience, and I'm sure they're just as appreciative as I am. Look, you say, "What you gonna do when they come from you?" I was like, "Bad boys, bad," but did your grandfather, did he right there? I love that. I love that. I'd like to also thank Tracy Rainey and Michelle Montgomery. I'd like to invite you all back on the Zoom chat. Thank you all for allowing me to moderate these important conversations about gun reform. I have had the best time. Like, I would do it even if you weren't my star as Dr. Carr. If you need me, sis, I got you for the AKAs. It's all good. Just let me know. But no, I am always appreciative of being a part of these important conversations. When we understand why God put us in the positions that we're in to get messages out, then it's a no-brainer, right? So thank you all for always including me. You always thank me, but it's an honor for me to be a part and to invite our community to learn and just become a part. Like, we just got to all, like, what do you say, that village, we got to get that village back. Dr. Carr said it earlier, and this is what we do when we have these discussions. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate tonight. Thank you.
Well, this was
Thank
a
you.
very good panel. We definitely have learned a lot. Just as Lady Jade said, thank you guys for just being so honest with the community, because a lot of times, you know, with faith-based organizations and with churches, sometimes you feel like you have to put on this aura, but you guys did not do that tonight. So we truly appreciate it. And also, we just wanted to let you all know, everyone on the panel, that we will be making donations to your organizations and your churches. So you will get those donations in the mail. And, you know, Lady Jade, I got you something extra special. So we'll talk about that offline. So, and we really want to thank you again just for being part, you know, of this gun reform. I know you're always so busy, but you always take the time to, you know, just work in your community and definitely to do things that are meaningful. So we just appreciate you, you know, taking time to help us doing these town halls. And I know you got to get up super early so you can be on the air again. Yeah. So Tracy.
Michelle, can I do a shameless plug? And you know, I normally don't do this. We were discussing mental health earlier. I do want to say this. I do have a nonprofit, Project 16, and we have partnered with another organization called Connect that's comprised of African-American women that are licensed professional counselors. And normally, you know, we do life skills and exposure opportunities for our students, but since we haven't been able to be in person, we've had to pivot. So what Project 16 has done is we foot the bill for therapy sessions for our teenagers, right? And so our round one has been closed. We're almost at an end of round one, but coming up in May, we'll be opening up to take back applications because, again, we keep discussing mental health, seeking therapy, counseling. It is expensive, right? And so we are literally sowing seeds into these Black businesses. We are intentionally getting LPCs of color to help our students, our teenagers. And we're also going to add an element where we also bring in the parent, because healing the teenager without healing the parent, you know. So I do want to put that out there. So you can go to project16.org. Again, we'll be taking applications again next month. And, you know, I normally never plug my stuff, but I just want everybody to know that resources out there and God is providing. That's all I can say. Cause I was like, where are we going to get the money to do this? He going to work it out. And when I tell you, even just yesterday, day before yesterday, I got an email randomly from somebody that wants to donate to the organization, and all of those funds will be going towards helping our kids get those counseling and therapy services. And again, we have LPCs, they're all licensed professional therapists. They've all been trained in racial trauma as well. And our kids are going to get help and see somebody that looks like them across that screen. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. So.
Well, very quickly, if you would send us that information, Abundant Life would like to donate $1,000 to you in support of that work.
Okay.
We believe in the work, and we're so grateful for the impact that it's making, and through our members and partners, that's a very vital, something of vital importance. And so let us know how we can contribute, and we're glad to do that tonight. Thank you.
Dr. Waters, thank you so much. I got on mascara. You can't make me cry on camera, Dr. Waters. You can't. No, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Tracy, do you have any closing remarks you want to say? Good. Okay. Well, again, we just want to thank you guys for just spending the evening with us. We truly appreciate all the knowledge that you've shared with us. And I'm sure the community has been impacted in a powerful way. So again, thank you so much. I feel like, this is our last one. What are we going to do with ourselves on a Thursday night? So anyway, thanks again for the panel. You guys have been excellent and we appreciate it. And of course, Lady J, you know, you do this kind of stuff in your sleep. So anyway, we thank you for your time as well.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.